I was not looking for anything haunted when the message arrived. It was 8:20 p.m. in my small apartment in Mapo, the February cold pressing against the windows like an extra pane of glass. My phone buzzed on the table beside a bowl of instant tteokbokki I had overcooked. The message was from Hana, who had become my main translator of the city and its moods ever since I moved to Seoul. We are going to Jeju this weekend. Urban exploration. Old hospital. Do you want to come? I read it twice. I teach English in a hagwon near Hongdae. My riskiest habit is drinking coffee after 6 p.m. I do not climb fences. I do not trespass. And I definitely do not poke the dead. I typed a polite refusal, then deleted it. I could hear my own students in my head. The way they say teacher. You always say, try new things. I set the phone down, looked at the cooled tteokbokki, and typed back, I will come. Hana reacted with a row of sparkling hearts, which I chose to interpret as encouragement rather than a warning. A second message followed, practical and clipped in the way she handled everything. Meet at Gimpo Airport, Saturday, 7:40 a.m. Carry light. Bring a headlamp and gloves. No sandals. No loud colors. No names written on anything. That last instruction felt like a joke I had not caught. But I did not ask. I packed that night. Gloves, headlamp, protein bars, a portable charger, a notebook, and a black windbreaker that makes me look like a substitute coach. I slept poorly, my mind running crowded circles around a phrase from her first message, old hospital. At 6:50 a.m. the next morning, I was on the subway, drowsy commuters pressing around me. The station announcements were comfortingly precise. The doors hissed open on a world still gray with morning. I walked into Gimpo's departure hall and saw Hana immediately. She waved from a bench, like she had been there all night. Cropped black hair under a knit cap, a camera slung at her hip with neon gaffer tape that broke her own rule about loud colors. She introduced the others as they arrived in quick succession. Minjun, tall and soft-spoken, a geography graduate student who carried a folded paper map as if phones did not exist. Ji Woo, a barista with a shaved stripe above one ear and a permanent half smile that made me think of actors waiting to be recognized. David, another American, a tourist I had never met, who said he had come for the food and stayed for the ghosts. He held a DSLR like a shield and wore hiking boots that appeared new enough to squeak. We keep groups small, Hana said, as if 4 could ever be called small. No risks, no hero moves. We enter, we record, we leave. What exactly is it? I asked. Tuberculosis, war, something else. Sanatorium, Minjun said, but the records are not clear whether it was psychiatric or pulmonary. The stories disagree. That is why we go. He unfolded the map on the bench and pointed to a smudge of green near the southern coast of Jeju. His finger tapped lightly, the way a doctor taps a knee to test a reflex. There is a service road here. Some people say a fence. Some say a gate. Some say nothing, only trees. He smiled, almost apologetically. In Korea, we sometimes keep ruins like old bones. We cover, not bury. Our flight left at 8:35 a.m. Through the oval window, I watched Seoul shrink into an organized texture of neighborhoods. Then water opened beneath us, gray-blue and wide. My head thudded with the thinnest echo of fear. I tried to name it and could not. The seatbelt light chimed. A child behind me recited numbers in Korean until the numbers turned into a song. We landed on Jeju under a sky the color of unpolished steel. At the car rental desk, Hana negotiated in quick Korean while I stood beside the luggage and pretended to be useful. We took a compact SUV that smelled faintly of mandarins. Someone had tucked a single halabong, bright as a traffic cone, into the cup holder. Ji-woo peeled it as we drove. The scent so clean and sweet, it made the air feel new. Jeju's roads were damp with recent rain. Stone walls laced the fields, black against the winter grass. The island had the quiet confidence of a place that remembers volcanoes sleeping under it. We passed a shuttered cafe with a hand-painted sign and a convenience store where a delivery man in a blue jacket stacked boxes with the care of someone building with cards. The radio muttered a ballad, and then a commercial, and then static. Hana turned it off, and the silence felt intentional. "Why no names on anything?" I asked finally. I held up my headlamp. I had taken a strip of black tape to cover the embossed letters of my last name because, despite myself, I follow instructions. Because it is polite, Hana said. Because names are promises. Because some places like to keep what they read. I told myself it was folklore. Nothing more. I told myself there are versions of this in every culture. Do not whistle at night. Do not look at the moon too long. Do not say your true name where the forest can hear. Still. Rubbed the covered plastic with my thumb, as if I might feel letters through it. We turned onto a narrower road, then onto a narrower one still. The stone walls gave way to trees. Bamboo leaned together and whispered. The GPS lost its patience and gave up. Minjun smoothed the map against his thigh and hummed a little sound that I took for concentration. Almost, he said, maybe 10 minutes by foot from where we can leave the car. We parked on a gravel shoulder where the road should have kept going, but did not. I stepped out into a cold that was not exactly stronger than Seoul's, but more intimate. It climbed my sleeves like it had been waiting for me. We divided gear without discussion. David handed me a roll of gaffer tape, and I tucked it into my pocket like a talisman. We walked. The service road was not a road so much as an idea. Grass had grown through cracked asphalt in a patient grid. Our boots sounded dryly on stone, and then wetly in places where water had collected and pretended to be shallow. The trees drew closer. At 11:12 a.m., according to the face of my watch, that suddenly seemed afraid to tick loudly. The road ended at a gate. It was not dramatic. Two rusted panels of chain link leaned toward each other like exhausted sentries. A metal sign hung crooked from one corner. The words had long since bled into a uniform scab of orange-brown, but the ghost of English letters remained. No entry after sunset. Someone had added a line below it, etched with a key into the paint. Any sun. Clever, Ji-woo said. You see, any sun. We did not touch the gate. We went around it. The fence did not bother to argue. It fell off into brush and then stopped entirely, as if fencing were a job it had been hired to do but had never loved. Beyond it, the ground sloped gently up, and the sanatorium introduced itself. One discrete piece at a time. First the corner of a wall, then a stack of windows with no glass, then the roofline, low and practical, made for rain and for forgetting. The building was larger than I had expected. but somehow still private, as if it had the right to its own past. "Do you hear that?" David asked. We listened. The wind took a breath and held it. No birds, no nearby road. Far off, the soft percussion of bamboo against bamboo. It was nothing, which is another word for everything when you are standing outside a place that should not exist. Hannah pulled a folded package from her backpack and shook out 4 disposable masks. "Dust," she said. "Mold. Bad air. Use them." We looped the elastic around our ears. The world narrowed by 1 layer. The smell of damp earth came through the fiber like a memory. We approached the main entrance across a courtyard where weeds had written their own alphabet. A row of wheelchairs sat under a collapsed awning, their wheels sunk into ground that had decided to be ground again. The door was a rectangle of dark where a door had once been. On the tiles beside it, a line of small brown bottles lay in a neat row, their labels bleached to nothing. Min-jun frowned at them, as if they were evidence in a case he had been assigned too late. "People come," he said. "People leave things. Offerings. Sometimes. Offerings to whom?" I asked. He shrugged, and I understood that he did not mean religion. He meant places. He meant the old hospital itself and all the names it had swallowed. I lifted my headlamp to my forehead, but did not switch it on. The 4 of us stood in a shallow semicircle at the threshold, the way people stand in front of a photograph they do not know how to look at. I became aware of my breathing. I became aware that my full name lived quietly inside me, a shape I had always carried. I felt, absurdly, like I should apologize to it for bringing it here. Hannah stepped forward. "Rules," she said softly. "We speak only when necessary. We do not separate without saying so. If you feel strange, you say stop, and we all stop. If you hear your name, you do not answer, unless one of us is so close that you can feel our breath. That is specific," David said behind his mask. "It is also kind," she answered. "Ready." No one answered yes. We answered by moving. The threshold was only a step, and yet it felt like a measurement, like those lines in old houses that mark children's heights. I placed my boot on the scarred tile and then lifted it again, not ready, then set it down a second time, as if repetition could make it true. Cold slid up from the floor into my bones. I realized suddenly how loud my heart was, how well it would echo in a stairwell. Hannah raised her hand and counted down from 3 with her fingers. On 1, she slipped into the dark. Ji-woo followed with a little tilt of the head, as if nodding to a host who had opened the door. Min-jun went 3rd. Paper map rolled and tucked under his arm, like a baton in a relay he refused to drop. I stood at the doorway a fraction longer than was dignified, listening to the air of the sanatorium breathe out once, and then in. I told myself that it was only a building, that people had stacked bricks and poured concrete and wired lights here, and that nothing made by hands could keep anything that did not want to be kept. I stepped inside. The light shifted. The temperature did not so much drop as change its mind about me. Dust rose and settled with the gentleness of ash. My headlamp cast a clean circle on a corridor that ran left and right like a choice I could not read. On the right wall, someone had once painted a cheerful line of blue waves and a red sun. The blue had survived. The red had drained away until the sun was only a pale disk. Hannah's voice reached back, just above a whisper, First floor, clockwise, then down. We stay together. I nodded, though she could not see me. My mask warmed with my breath and cooled again when I drew in the air of the hospital, and it felt like a tide moving through fabric. We began to walk, and with each step, the building answered with soft sounds that might have been settling or might have been listening. At 11:34 a.m., I checked my watch for no reason I could defend. The second hand stuttered, then kept going. I told myself that it was fine, that watches stutter. I told myself that a name is only a word until it is spoken by a mouth you cannot see. Ahead, somewhere just around the bend, something scraped gently across the floor, like someone moving a chair. Careful not to wake anyone. We turned the corner. The hallway curved just enough to hide its end, the paint on its walls peeling in vertical strips like old wallpaper that had given up. My headlamp caught fragments of laminated posters still tacked in place, diagrams of lungs, illustrations of how to wash hands, faded photographs of smiling nurses who had long since stopped smiling. The Korean captions were faded but legible. Hana read them softly under her breath. Prevention begins with cleanliness. Breathe deeply. Live long. Her voice sounded wrong here, too alive against walls that had heard nothing for decades. We walked in a line, our boots grinding against tile dust, until the hallway widened into what had once been a reception area. The counter remained, scratched by years of elbows and pens, and behind it, shelves sagged with files that had melted into unreadable blocks of paper. The ceiling above us was caved in at one corner, exposing wooden beams that hung like ribs. The scraping sound came again, closer this time. We froze. David raised his camera instinctively and snapped a burst of photos, the shutter like stuttering teeth in the silence. When we checked the screen, the photo showed nothing but dust motes, yet all of us had heard it. Hannah angled her flashlight toward the corridor, branching off the left, its mouth darker than the rest of the building. Could be wind, Minjun offered, though his tone lacked conviction. We pressed on. The air grew heavier, damp with something other than rain. I thought of basements, of underground pools, where light never reached. Each step felt like we were being asked a question I could not translate. At the end of the corridor, we found a set of double doors propped halfway open. The metal was warped. The glass panels fractured into jagged veins. Beyond them stretched what looked like a dining hall. Tables overturned, benches broken. An enamel tray lay in the middle of the floor, perfectly clean, as if waiting to be used. Hana crouched, ran her gloved fingers across the tray's surface. She frowned. "It's warm," she whispered. That was impossible. The building had no power, no heating, nothing. Yet when I touched the tray, a faint heat pulsed under my palm like something alive. I pulled my hand back too quickly, the clang echoing like a bell. All of us turned at once. From the far corner of the hall, a wheelchair shifted forward an inch. The squeal of rusted wheels was unmistakable. David swore under his breath. He snapped more photos, hands shaking just enough to blur the images. I counted the distance between us and the wheelchair. 30 feet. No wind. No slope in the floor. "Maybe someone's here," I said, though the words felt thin, inadequate. Hana shook her head. "No one lives here." The wheelchair inched forward again. This time, 2 sharp jerks. Its wheels traced faint lines through the dust. leading toward us. Ji-woo laughed nervously, the sound high and strained. Remote control. A prank. You guys do that here. No one answered. We stood motionless until the chair stilled. A dozen feet away, facing us as though waiting for an occupant, Hana straightened, pulled the strap of her camera tight across her chest. Reception. Basement. Then we leave, she said firmly, as though rules could anchor us to reality. We bypassed the wheelchair, keeping to the wall like swimmers circling a shadow. My shoulders brushed cracked plaster, flakes falling like ash. The air tasted metallic now, like biting down on foil. Back through another corridor, narrower this time, lined with patient rooms. Each door gaped open, showing beds stripped bare. Rust bloomed on the frames. Curtains hung like skin, shredded by mold. A single IV stand leaned against the wall, its hook bent like a broken finger. I peered into one room and saw faint chalk lines drawn on the floor. Circles, overlapping, scrawled in a child's uncertain hand. Korean words scribbled across the wall above the bed. Not sick, not sick, not sick. I stepped back quickly, my heart beat a hammer. At the far end of the hallway stood a stairwell descending into shadow. The sign above it still clung to the wall. Seriosil treatment rooms. Hana stopped at the top step, turned to us. Basement is where the stories are, she said. If you want to leave, do it now. None of us moved. Even David, pale beneath his mask, raised his camera like an oath. All right, Hana said. She switched her headlamp to a brighter beam, its circle spilling down the concrete steps. We go together. I followed as her boots touched the first stair. The sound echoed downward, multiplied, until it felt like dozens of feet were descending with us. Halfway down, I realized the air had changed again. No longer musty, no longer metallic. It smelled sterile, sharp, as though someone had just cleaned with alcohol and bleach. And beneath that, faint but real, came the sound of voices, not whispers, not echoes. Voices speaking in unison, low and steady, chanting syllables I could not understand. We froze mid-stair. The beam of Hana's lamp trembled slightly across the basement wall. There shouldn't be anyone here, she whispered. But the voices continued, rising and falling like waves. At 12:08 p.m., I knew for certain we were not alone in the sanatorium. The chanting faded the deeper we went, like voices receding behind a heavy door. Yet I knew we all knew that the air did not lose sound naturally. It was pulled away, stolen, like breath pressed flat against glass. At the base of the stairwell, the beam of Hana's lamp caught rows of steel lockers bolted against the wall. Their paint was blistered, tags long since peeled. Some were ajar, gaping open like mouths in mid-cry. A medical cart slumped sideways nearby, its wheels rusted into crooked angles, drawers half open to reveal empty vials, cracked syringes, and rolls of discolored tape. The smell was stronger here, not just mold or dust, something medicinal, sterile, the sharp tang of disinfectant clinging stubbornly after decades. It was so clean it felt wrong, as if the room itself were still in use. We stepped into a corridor lined with observation windows. Behind the glass, padded rooms slouched in ruin, stuffing spilling like yellowed organs from the torn walls. Some bore scratches deep enough to cut into the plaster beneath. Listen, Hana whispered suddenly. We froze. From farther down the hall, came the softest echo. Hana. My skin crawled. The syllables stretched long, like breath leaking from a punctured lung. Hana stiffened. She did not move, did not breathe. I could see her knuckles whitening on the flashlight grip. "Did one of you?" David began, but Hana hissed a sharp shh before he finished. The voice came again, clearer this time, impossibly close, right beside her ear. Nah. I saw her flinch. "No," Minjun said quickly. His voice was louder than it should have been. "No one answer. The rules. If you hear your name, you do not answer." Hana pressed her lips together until her jaw trembled. She turned her head slowly, scanning the hallway behind us. No one. Nothing. Then David's camera clicked, unprompted. The burst echoed like distant fireworks in the corridor. He cursed and pulled it down, the strap jerking against his neck. "I didn't press anything," he whispered. His hands shook visibly, the camera still rattling from its own tremor. We huddled together around the display screen. The first few photos showed only blurred shots of walls, lockers. Hannah's profile caught mid-flinch. But then came one image, one that froze my stomach cold. A figure stood at the far end of the corridor, bare feet, thin legs pale as bone, a hospital gown stained down the front with something darker than dust. The face was lost in shadow, head bowed, hair hanging forward like a curtain, yet the body was angled toward us, watching, waiting. When we looked up, the corridor was empty. No sound, no trace, only the smell of bleach growing sharper, cutting into my nose and throat. David snapped the camera shut, as if afraid more photos would show more than we could bear. I think Hana began, but her voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again. "I think we should stay together. No splitting. Not now." We moved as one, every beam of our headlamps overlapping, painting the hallway in jittering light. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, and I realized the chant we'd heard earlier had never been words at all. It was the same syllable, drawn out, broken, repeated again and again. "Na, na, na." Not Hannah, not me, not anyone we knew. Just a half name, a fragment, a lure. And it followed us as we walked deeper into the basement. At 12:31 p.m., I felt it for the first time. The sense that the building itself knew who we were, and that it had already begun choosing which one of us it would keep. The corridor narrowed until it met a fork, two hallways stretching in opposite directions, each swallowed by shadow. Our flashlights reached only so far before the dark swallowed them again. Like water drinking ink, Hana stopped, glanced at her watch, then at us. We cover both sides. Faster that way. "No," David said immediately. His voice was thin but sharp. "No splitting. You saw what happened with the photo." Hannah's jaw clenched. I could see the muscle twitch beneath her skin, her mask rising and falling with her breath. "We won't finish before dark if we don't." Dark. The word landed heavy, like a verdict. I imagined the sign on the gate again. "No entry after sunset. Any sun. I'll go with you," Minjun said to Hana. He nodded toward the right hall. "We'll check the treatment rooms. You too." He looked at me, and David covered the storage and records wing. "Meet back here in 15 minutes. No longer." It sounded practical. It sounded organized. But beneath his calm tone, I caught the same thing gnawing at me. Fear trying to dress itself as logic. David shook his head again. Bad idea. Hannah stepped closer to him. Every exploration, people argue. Every time. Same thing. But if we stay in one pack, we miss too much. That's not why we came. The silence stretched. My chest tightened with a pressure that wasn't mine. It was the buildings leaning in, eager to see which way we would choose. Finally, David muttered, "Fine." 15 minutes. The group split. I went with David down the left hallway. The air was colder here, the tiles damp underfoot, as though the pipes had never stopped leaking. The walls bore signs in Korean and English. Supply room, records, morgue. The arrows pointed forward, and forward was the only way we could go. David's light shook as he walked. "You feel it too, right?" he asked. "Feel what?" I whispered, though I already knew. "That heaviness, like we're walking inside a lung that doesn't want us here." I nodded, throat dry. My lamp beam caught the edge of a gurney, shoved against the wall, its straps dangling. One strap twitched as though tugged by an invisible hand, then fell still. We entered a storage room stacked with crumbling cardboard boxes. Most had collapsed, spilling bandages, yellow with age, glass bottles clouded with residue, and paper records eaten by mildew. The air was thick, harder to breathe. David crouched and lifted a folder. The paper tore as he touched it, leaving only fragments, nothing left. He muttered, "Everything erased." From somewhere above us came a muffled thump, then a dragging sound, heavy and deliberate. We froze. The sound passed along the ceiling, right overhead, until it faded. David's eyes met mine. That's where Hana and Minjun went. We did not call out. The rules pressed down on me like iron. If you hear your name, you do not answer. I wondered if that applied to voices that weren't names, but sounded too close, too human. We moved deeper until the records room yawned open before us. The shelves stood tall, row after row, but their contents were reduced to mulch. The floor squelched underfoot where water had seeped in. Then my headlamp caught something clean among the rot. A single binder, its cover untouched, resting neatly in the center of a desk. David whispered, "That looks new." The binder's label read in English, "Patient intake, 1973. The ink had not faded. I opened it. The first pages listed names, all in neat handwriting, followed by diagnosis codes. But halfway through the binder, the pages were blank. Only one entry stood alone on the final sheet. Name, Daniel Ward. Status, admitted. My throat locked. The ink looked fresh, wet, even. I snapped the binder shut so hard dust burst from its edges. David stumbled back. "What did you see?" "Nothing." I lied, my voice unsteady, but the truth clung to me like mold. This place knew me. It had known me before I set foot inside. From the hallway behind us came a scream, high hum, sharp, and abruptly cut off. Hana, at 12:54 p.m. The 15 minutes we were given ended in a single breath of terror. The scream snapped us into motion. David bolted first, his boots striking wet tile in frantic rhythm, and I chased after him, lungs already burning. The corridor seemed longer on the way back, stretching like elastic, every flicker of our headlamps bouncing off walls that leaned closer. When we reached the fork again, Hana and Minjun were nowhere in sight, only silence, thick and swollen, as if the building had swallowed the sound whole. "Hana," David shouted before I could stop him. His voice cracked down the hallway, echoing too far, too many times, until it no longer sounded like his voice at all. The reply was not words, but the slam of a metal door below us, somewhere deeper, somewhere in the basement. We found the stairwell they must have taken and descended. The concrete steps vibrated faintly, as if someone else had just run down them seconds earlier. The air grew colder, every breath frosting the inside of my mask. At the bottom, the hallway opened into a broad chamber. My light swept across rusted equipment, steel tables, broken monitors, wheeled carts with straps dangling like dead vines. But what froze me were the chairs. There were 6 of them, bolted to the floor in a crooked line. Each had wide leather restraints, hanging loose ankle straps, wrist straps, and one thick band that stretched across where a chest would be. Rust bled through the leather like old wounds. Hana was there. She stood rigid in front of one chair, her flashlight dangling at her side, beam pointed uselessly at the floor. Her shoulders rose and fell in jerky bursts, as if she could not remember how to breathe. "Hana," I called softly. Her head turned toward us, but her eyes did not find ours. They rolled, unfocused, pupils blown wide. Her lips moved, whispering words that were not her own. "Do not let them write it. Do not let them write your name." Her voice was layered hers, and underneath it, another tone, hollow and resonant, like someone speaking through a crack in the wall. Minjun was crouched nearby, hands half raised as if afraid to touch her. She started repeating it. He said, his voice tight, over and over. Then she just froze. I stepped closer, every nerve in my body screaming not to. The air around Hana was colder, sharper, and with each word, her breath puffed visibly into the room, though mine did not. David lifted his camera, as if documenting could protect him. "She's possessed," he muttered. "Jesus Christ, she's—" "Stop talking," Minjun snapped. "It feeds on attention." The words Hana whispered grew clearer, stronger, until they filled the chamber like a chant. "Do not let them write. Do not let them write. Do not let them write." And then she looked directly at me, not at David, not at Minjun, at me. Her pupils locked, and for the first time her voice carried only one phrase, sharp and exact. "They already wrote your name. Daniel Ward." My chest tightened, my hand instinctively pressing the pocket where the binder still burned like a brand. I had not told anyone what I saw written inside it, but she spoke as if she had read it aloud herself. A sudden metallic clang cut through the chamber. One of the leather straps on the nearest chair snapped taut, jerking upward as though an invisible body had been buckled in. Then another, and another. Each strap drew tight, stretching and creaking, until all 6 chairs trembled against the bolts in the floor. Hana's flashlight clattered from her hand. She screamed not in her own voice, but in that hollow resonance, and staggered back, clutching her temples. The building seemed to lean closer, listening. At 1:23 p.m., I realized the sanatorium was not haunted by patients alone. It was haunted by the process, the rituals, the act of strapping a body down, recording a name, erasing it from the world. And it had chosen Hana to speak that truth to us. The straps on the 6 chairs quivered as if invisible patience strained against them. The leather creaking under pressure that was not there. I couldn't breathe. The air tasted of copper and mildew. Then, as suddenly as it began, the movement stopped. The straps hung limp. The silence afterward was heavier than the noise, like something holding its breath. Hana collapsed to her knees. Minjun lunged to catch her, his map sliding from his pocket and scattering across the wet floor. He crouched low, murmuring in Korean, shaking her shoulders gently. She blinked, dazed, but her lips still moved soundlessly, repeating the words we couldn't hear. David raised his camera again, hands trembling. "We should leave," he whispered. "Now. Forget this place. We..." The sound cut him off. A scrape, then a drag. It came from the hallway behind us. All three of us turned at once. The beam of my headlamp fell across the tiled floor, just as something long and dark streaked out of view, leaving a faint wet trail. My blood turned cold. Minjun stood, instinctively placing himself between Hana and the hall. His jaw was tight, eyes darting into the dark. "Stay here. I'll check." No, I reached for him, but he had already stepped out into the corridor, flashlight bobbing. His light swayed back and forth, then stopped. "Minjun." My voice cracked. Too loud, too desperate. No answer. Only the faint echo of his boots scuffing against tile as if he was walking away. Then, abruptly, the sound turned into a dragging, heavier, like his body was being pulled across the floor. The beam of his flashlight dropped, spun wildly, and disappeared. I sprinted into the hallway, but it was empty. The trail of wet streaks glistened faintly, leading deeper into the dark. "Minjun." My shout rang back at me, multiplied, distorted, until it sounded like a dozen voices calling his name. Then silence. David grabbed my shoulder, yanking me back toward the room. His face was pale under the headlamp glow. "He's gone. You saw it. He's gone." "No," I said, shaking him off. "We can't just..." A sudden metallic bang erupted above us, like a door slamming. The sound rolled down the stairwell we'd descended earlier, the way out. We scrambled back up the steps, half dragging Hana between us. She was breathing hard now, consciousness returning, but her eyes darted wildly, unfocused. When we reached the ground floor and burst into the entry corridor, the main doors loomed ahead, rusted panels of glassless steel. Salvation! I lunged forward, grabbed the handles, and pulled. Nothing. The doors didn't budge. I pulled harder, muscles screaming, but the handles refused to move. It felt like someone was pressing back from the other side, calmly, effortlessly, holding us in. David slammed his shoulder against the frame. The clang echoed like a gunshot, but the door didn't shift an inch. Behind us, somewhere deep in the sanatorium, a voice echoed up through the corridors. Not Hana's name this time. Mine, drawn out, deliberate, dripping with familiarity. Daniel Ward. The sound slid across the walls, climbing toward us. At 1:52 p.m., I knew the sanatorium was not going to let us leave. We stood in front of the locked doors, panting, our lights jittering as our hands shook. The silence after my name had been spoken was worse than the voice itself, like the entire sanatorium was listening for my answer. "We can't stay here," David hissed. If the main door won't open, there has to be another way. A side exit, a fire escape, something. Hannah staggered against the wall, still pale, sweat soaking through her mask. Down, she muttered weakly. Not up. They locked the top. Only way out is down. Her words chilled me. She said them like a memory, not a guess. David swore under his breath, but he knew she was right. We turned back into the maze of corridors, dragging our beams of light over cracked tiles and flaking paint. The deeper we went, the louder the building seemed to breathe. The hallway bent sharply and opened into a large ward. My light swept across rows of rusted bed frames, all bolted to the floor. Each still had its curtain rail overhead, and what remained of the curtains sagged in gray tatters. They shifted faintly in a draft we couldn't feel, as if something brushed them from behind. We entered cautiously, boots crunching on broken glass. The smell hit first, not just mold, but something faintly sweet, chemical, like rotting fruit soaked in disinfectant. Then came the sound, whispers, dozens of them, layered over each other, sibilant, sliding in and out of Korean and English, as if testing which language we would answer to. They rose and fell with no clear source, coming from every corner of the ward, from under beds, from behind curtains, from the ceiling itself. Don't answer, I whispered, my throat dry. David raised his camera with trembling hands. The shutter clicked once, twice, each flash momentarily bleaching the ward white. On the third flash, my breath stopped. One of the beds wasn't empty. In the momentary burst of light, I saw a figure seated upright, back rigid, hands folded neatly in its lap. The hospital gown clung to a frame far too thin. Ribs, visible under stretched fabric. But it wasn't the body that froze me. It was the head. There was no face, just smooth skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. The flash died, plunging us back into the jittering glow of our headlamps. The bed was empty again. David checked his camera screen, his voice breaking. Oh my God, it's there. It's still there on the photo. The whispers swelled, faster, urgent now. Curtains swayed as if hands clawed from underneath. A sharp metallic slam echoed from the far end of the ward, and one bed shuddered violently across the floor, scraping steel against tile. Hannah clutched my sleeve, her nails biting through fabric. They want a patient, she whispered, her voice shaking. One of us has to stay. That's the rule. That's always been the rule. No, I said firmly, though my voice cracked. No one stays. We find another way. But in the back of my mind, the truth dug its claws in. The binder had already written Daniel Ward in. My name was here. My place was ready. And as the whispers circled the ward, they began to chant in unison, low and rhythmic, as though welcoming someone to lie down. At 2:19 p.m., I realized we weren't visitors anymore. We were patients, waiting to be admitted. The whispers gnawed at the edges of my mind, chewing through reason. They rose and fell in a rhythm like breathing, like 100 unseen mouths pressing close to our ears. Curtains rattled on their rails. The beds trembled faintly, the iron frames humming with vibrations that came from nowhere. David cracked first. He lowered his camera and pointed to the far corner of the ward, his face pale and slick with sweat. He's there, he whispered. Don't you see him? Minjin's right there. He's waiting for us. I followed his gaze. There was nothing but a shadow cast across the wall, by our overlapping headlamps. But David staggered forward, hands outstretched, like a child reaching for a parent. "David, stop," I hissed, grabbing his arm. He yanked free with surprising strength. "It's him. He's calling me. He wants me to come." His voice cracked into a laugh, high and thin, too close to hysteria. "He's smiling. But the shadow on the wall didn't smile. It didn't even move. Behind me, Hana whimpered. I turned and froze. Her body was rigid again, head tilted back slightly, her eyes wide but rolled so far upward that only the white showed. Her lips moved, whispering in a voice not hers. "One must remain. One must remain. One must remain." The phrase looped endlessly, each repetition scraping raw against my nerves. I shook her shoulders. "Hana, fight it, come back." But she only stiffened more, her hands twitching in jerks, as if strings pulled them from above. The ward seemed to lean closer around us. The whispers that filled it grew louder, pressing, crowding into my skull until I could barely hear my own breath. Then, without warning, every beam of light died. My headlamp blinked out. David's camera light cut off. Even Hana's flashlight dropped on the floor. Went dark. We were plunged into total blackness. The silence that followed lasted only a second. Then came the footsteps, dozens of them, pacing across the ward, circling the beds, padding across tile, dragging against steel frames. Too many to count. They moved in unison, as though a ward full of patients had risen from their beds and begun walking. I couldn't see a thing. My pulse hammered against my skull. I fumbled at my headlamp, slapping at it, twisting it, but it was dead. My name. The voice slid from the dark, closer than it had ever been. It didn't whisper this time. It spoke. Calm, deliberate, patient. David screamed. His voice cracked through the dark, but it was cut off halfway, strangled, like a hand had clamped over his mouth. Something heavy slammed against a bed frame, then silence again, except for the sound of Hana's voice, still chanting in the dark. "One must remain. One must remain. One must remain." At 2:47 p.m., I realized the sanatorium had taken control of every sense but one. I couldn't see. I couldn't trust what I heard. I couldn't breathe without choking on its air. All I had left was touch, and something cold, damp, and skeletal had just closed its hand around my wrist. The whispers gnawed at the edges of my mind, chewing through reason. They rose and fell in a rhythm like breathing, like 100 unseen mouths pressing close to our ears. Curtains rattled on their rails. The beds trembled faintly, the iron frames humming with vibrations that came from nowhere. David cracked first. He lowered his camera and pointed to the far corner of the ward, his face pale and slick with sweat. "He's there," he whispered. "Don't you see him? Minjun's right there. He's waiting for us." I followed his gaze. There was nothing but a shadow cast across the wall by our overlapping headlamps. But David staggered forward, hands outstretched, like a child reaching for a parent. "David, stop," I hissed, grabbing his arm. He yanked free with surprising strength. "It's him. He's calling me. He wants me to come." His voice cracked into a laugh, high and thin, too close to hysteria. "He's smiling. But the shadow on the wall didn't smile. It didn't even move. Behind me, Hana whimpered. I turned and froze. Her body was rigid again, head tilted back slightly, her eyes wide, but rolled so far upward that only the whites showed. Her lips moved, whispering in a voice not hers, "One must remain. One must remain. One must remain." The phrase looped endlessly, each repetition scraping raw against my nerves. I shook her shoulders. "Hana, fight it, come back." But she only stiffened more, her hands twitching in jerks, as if strings pulled them from above. The ward seemed to lean closer around us. The whispers that filled it grew louder, pressing, crowding into my skull until I could barely hear my own breath. Then, without warning, every beam of light died. My headlamp blinked out. David's camera light cut off. Even Hana's flashlight dropped on the floor, went dark. We were plunged into total blackness. The silence that followed lasted only a second. Then came the footsteps, dozens of them, pacing across the ward, circling the beds, padding across tile, dragging against steel frames. Too many to count. They moved in unison, as though a ward full of patients had risen from their beds and begun walking. I couldn't see a thing. My pulse hammered against my skull. I fumbled at my headlamp, slapping at it, twisting it, but it was dead. My name? The voice slid from the dark, closer than it had ever been. It didn't whisper this time. It spoke. Calm, deliberate, patient. David screamed. His voice cracked through the dark, but it was cut off halfway, strangled, like a hand had clamped over his mouth. Something heavy slammed against the bed frame. Then silence again, except for the sound of Hana's voice, still chanting in the dark. "One must remain. One must remain. One must remain." At 2:47 p.m., I realized the sanatorium had taken control of every sense but one. I couldn't see. I couldn't trust what I heard. I couldn't breathe without choking on its air. All I had left was touch, and something cold, damp, and skeletal had just closed its hand around my wrist. The hand around my wrist was ice cold, the skin papery, the grip impossibly strong. I jerked back instinctively and nearly fell into one of the rusted bed frames. The impact sent a metallic shriek tearing across the ward. And then light. My headlamp flared on again without warning, flooding the space with a pale, jittering beam. David was gone. His camera lay on the floor, its strap twisted like it had been torn from his neck. Hana was crumpled against the wall, whispering still, her body shivering in small spasms. The bed stood empty. Every curtain hung limp, but the floor was smeared with streaks that hadn't been there before long. Dark trails that dragged toward a side door at the far end of the ward. Something wanted me to follow. I half carried, half dragged Hana with me, her feet stumbling uselessly, her head lolling against my shoulder. The side door groaned open on rusted hinges, revealing a stairwell that plunged deeper into the ground. We descended. Each step groaned like a warning. The air grew denser, hotter this time, saturated with the stench of iron and old paper. At the bottom, my light spilled into a cavernous room lined wall to wall with shelves, file boxes, record binders stacked high, row upon row, perfectly preserved. The records room. My pulse thudded in my ears. The sanatorium had been rotting everywhere else, but here it was pristine. The shelves gleamed faintly as if polished. The papers were crisp, unblemished. I set Hana gently against a shelf and staggered forward. My hands trembled as I pulled down the first binder. Inside, names. Neat handwriting. Korean and English both. Side by side. Each page listed a patient. Name. Date of admission. Condition. A red line was drawn through each name. Clean and deliberate. Every page ended the same. Status. Admitted. I flipped faster. Dozens. Hundreds. Each one crossed out, until I reached the last binder. Sitting alone on a desk in the center of the room, waiting like it knew I was coming. The cover was black, unmarked. I opened it. The first page was blank. The second, the third. My fingers smudged the edges as I turned. Faster and faster, my breath rasping. Then I found it on the very last sheet. Name, Daniel Ward. Status, admitted. The ink glistened wet, fresh. Behind me, Hannah's voice broke through the silence, sharp and guttural. Do not let them write it. She gagged mid-sentence, choked, then screamed. Too late. The pages fluttered under a wind that hadn't been there a second before. The shelves rattled. Folders toppled in cascades, spilling papers that swirled like a storm. The doors slammed shut behind me. The light above flickered, dimmed, then steadied, and from the far side of the room, a figure emerged. Thin, hospital gown, bare feet dragging softly against the concrete, head bowed, face hidden behind strands of dark, matted hair. It carried a clipboard, and I knew without question that it had come to collect me. At 3:15 p.m., standing in the sanatorium's record room, I understood the truth. This place didn't just hold on to the dead, it recruited, and my name was already on its list. The figure moved slowly between the shelves, dragging the clipboard against the metal edges as it passed. The scrape echoed like chalk across a blackboard. I couldn't move. My feet rooted into the floor, as if the ink of my own name had nailed me there. It stopped just short of the desk. The strands of hair shifted, but I never saw a face. One pale hand, bones sharp beneath the skin, extended the clipboard toward me. The paper clipped to it was blank, until it wasn't. In one long, deliberate stroke, letters bled across the page, curling into shape. My name, written again, darker this time, as though carved into the fibers of the sheet. Beneath it, the word admitted bloomed in red. Hannah screamed behind me, not in her voice. The sound was deeper, ragged, like someone being drowned. When I spun, she was gone. Her body was still there against the shelf, but her presence was gone. She was staring straight through me, lips moving silently, like a puppet with its strings cut. The lights overhead flickered, then surged to life in a blinding white. My knees buckled, and suddenly I was lying down. The straps tightened across my wrists, my chest, my ankles. The cracked leather smelled of rot, but it held firm, as though newly fastened. I thrashed against them, heart pounding, screaming words that no one answered. A face leaned into view above me, not the faceless patient from before, not Hannah. A man, Korean, mid-40s, his hair combed neatly back, his white coat impossibly clean in a place so ruined. He smiled gently, like a father speaking to a child who had just woken from a nightmare. "Welcome back," he said in careful English. His voice was warm, practiced, kind. "You've been our patient for years, Daniel Ward." My throat locked. "No," I rasped, No, I'm not. He pressed a finger to my lips, silencing me. Then he reached for the clipboard, checked the sheet. My name, read and final. He nodded. Yes, he said softly. You are. The lights above burned hotter, brighter, my vision blurred, edges dissolving. And the last thing I saw was his calm eyes watching me. And the reflection in them was not my face. It was the faceless patient, finally smiling. At 3:42 p.m., the story ended where it had begun. In the sanatorium, strapped down, my name written and rewritten until there was no difference between visitor and patient. And when the lights went out, I knew they would not let me wake anywhere else.